Chapter 15, Disasters. The first raid was my idea, and it was a disaster. It wasn't even a real raid. We staged a mock attack on the core scraper just to see how well we could get in and out and use the diggers to maneuver in the rock. We lost our first digger when Mandeep swerved too quickly and ripped into the engine block of Finn's machine. It could have been way worse. A foot closer to the cockpit and Finn would have been seriously injured or killed. After extracting Finn from the wreckage, we reassembled outside the infirmary. Look, everyone, you've got to pay closer attention to the directional indicator on the map. The arrow needs to be pointed directly ahead, right up the middle. If it swerves, it means you're off course. We'd gone through this in training over and over, but in the stress of a real, or close to real, scenario, it had been one of the first lessons they'd forgotten. Elena stood next to me. There's also a motion sensor on the front of the digger. It picks up vibrations in the rock. It will alert you if you are close to something that's moving, so you can avoid loose rock and other diggers. Mandeep's shoulders sagged. I wasn't trying to make her feel bad, but we couldn't afford to mess up in a real raid. It's a lot to keep track of, I know. That's why today is just a practice run. Elena stood with her arms behind her back and began to pace from side to side. MiNRS, listen up. We want to attack in a line, left to right, but we don't want them to anticipate where we're coming from, so we also want to stagger the ETA of our entry into the target. Can you put that in English, General Rosales? Jimmy said. Elena scowled as Pavel joined in. Shall we reckon with a mission over and out and rejig with a... he said, smirking. I frowned at both of them. The idea is to have one of us do quick salvage while the others are there for backup. Or demolition, Elena added. Don't worry too much about destroying stuff. You have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. The main thing is to get in and out quickly. This is a mock raid, not a mock battle. I stole a quick glance at Elena. She was frowning. And remember that we can talk at close range, I added. The diggers have radio capability. Elena pointed toward the ceiling. The landers can't pick up the signal way up there. Things will be a bit different for a real raid when we're closer to them. But for today, feel free to keep your radio on for the whole drill. Otherwise, pretend this is a raid on the landers' food depot. Don't worry about taking prisoners, Elena said. Otherwise, pretend this is a raid on the lander food depot. Don't worry about taking prisoners, Elena said, a steely look in her eyes. I felt a pang of sadness. As much as Elena had agreed to my plan for mini raids, I knew that she really wanted to fight and kill landers. All I could do was hope that never had to happen. I strapped on my helmet. Let's get back in those diggers. Aim for the 28th floor. We cut in from the exterior wall, in and out quickly. I had a faint hope we might find the lost map on the 28th floor. I was tempted to tell everyone else about the map and the beacon, but I remembered the blasting Elena had given me, so I kept it quiet for now. Let's see what we're capable of, Elena said. We fired up the diggers and cut into the rock, rising toward the ruined hull of the core scraper on a steep angle. We reached the level of the 28th floor, then flattened out and approached in a set sequence. I went first, Pavel second, then Mandeep and Finn. Elena would come in at the floor last, sneaking in as the imaginary landers were distracted. She would steal some food or sabotage some part of their operation. Pavel swerved unexpectedly before we'd gone more than a few feet, gunning his engine and cutting right across my path. My disruptor hit the resulting air pocket and stalled. I was supposed to be the first one into the building, but now I'd be lucky if I got there before Elena. That was worse than not getting there at all, at least for the sake of our little rehearsal. I'm out, I called into the radio. Number 1 is down. Wimp, Elena called back. Ha ha, I said, but I smiled. Joking was one way to alleviate the stress. That is, if she was joking. I'm going in, Mandeep called over the radio. I heard the sound of cracking concrete, then a much louder rumble. Guys, I think I took out a support beam. As if to back her up, the rumble got louder. That was Finn, Mandeep said. He just took out another beam. Stuff falling all over the place. She sounded panicked. The rumble grew even louder and constant. This was a very bad thing. The core scraper wasn't as stable as I'd hoped. The top floors must have continued to collapse. The pillars had been holding it up. Elena, pull back, abandon, Mandeep called into her radio. Then her radio went silent. Negative, Elena said. I'm going in. I need to test my aim. Out of there, I yelled. Everyone back to camp now. I can't see Mandeep anymore, Finn said, his voice trembling. Finn, reverse, reverse, I yelled. I could hear him through his radio firing up his engine and slamming it into reverse. I hoped my disruptor had cooled enough to start up. I nudged against the wall and fired it up. It burned blue and began dismantling the rock. I gunned the engine and sped toward the core scraper. I broke through the wall close to Mandeep. Her digger was crushed, a giant slab of concrete pinning down the entire front section. I slammed my fist against my steering wheel. Then I saw something moving in the cockpit. She was alive. I turned my digger toward her. My disruptor had shut off, but the drill would work. I cut through the debris between us slowly. I could see her fingers scraping against the latch, desperately trying to escape before more concrete came crushing down. I'm almost there. Hold on, I yelled, though I suspected she couldn't hear me. I began digging through the slab that was pinning the cockpit lid down. The drill ate away, sending chunks of concrete flying. Just then, Elena shot through, right next to me. Her aim was accurate, but incredibly ill-timed. She slammed sideways into my rear, knocking me off target. The front of my digger listed to the left and began slicing into the shell of Mandeep's cockpit. A few more seconds, and she would be shredded. I strained with all my might to turn the steering wheel back to the right. I could feel the muscles in my arms ready to rip. With a lurch, the digger moved and began slicing back into the concrete. Finally, the slab split apart completely. Mandeep shoved her latch open and flew out of the wreckage. I opened my cockpit and pulled her in next to me. I closed the lid. Hold on, I said. Mandeep was breathing so fast I thought she might explode. I slammed the digger in reverse, swung to face the rock, and ignited my disruptor. We sped back to camp. Mandeep practically leaped from the cockpit, stumbled to her bed, and curled up in a ball under her sheets. Maria marched up to me angrily. What did you do? She spat an inch from my face. There was a problem with the structure of the floor. I got her out. She'll be okay. She better be, Maria said, shoving me backwards. Then she sat down next to Mandeep and patted her hand, whispering to her softly. Soon they were both asleep. I knew how she felt. Why hadn't Elena listened to me? Why hadn't she stopped? She'd always been like that, of course. A force of nature is what my mom used to call her. But putting everyone else at risk, that wasn't the Elena I knew. I knew I wasn't the same Christopher, but I held out hope that if we could just get through this, get through the horror, then we'd be friends again. Maybe we'd be more than that. I was lost in these thoughts when Elena returned. She leaped out of her cockpit with a huge smile. That was a blast, she said, slapping me on the shoulder. I can't wait to do it for real. You could have gotten us all killed, I hissed, trying not to wake Mandeep. Elena took a step back. Her smile evaporated, and her face was as still as stone. This isn't a game, Nichols. We need to know what we're capable of. I know, you said that. Well, one of the things you need to be capable of, Rosales, is following the plan. Or would you prefer to spend our first real raid back here babysitting? I thought sounding like Elena might get her to listen to me. Elena glared at me. I couldn't tell if she was hurt or just angry. Remember when we all agreed we need to work together? We still need someone to act like a leader, and that seems to be my job, so let me lead. That means that when I say get out, you get out. Do you understand? She continued to glare at me, saying nothing. She swung her backpack off her shoulders and opened it up. It was filled with food and supplies she'd salvaged from the core scraper. I stared, incredulous. How? I said, not quite able to visualize how she could have done this. All this in just a few minutes in the middle of a collapsing building. That's amazing, I said. Not questioning your authority, sir. She stood back up straight. I hit your digger, but if you'd operated according to plan or signaled your location over the radio, I could have avoided you. I knew I was supposed to arrive close to Mandeep, so I was planning on saving her. When I saw you were there, I decided to actually test our original plan and do a search for supplies. I found some. I started to feel guilty about ripping into her, even though she had disobeyed an order. You could have told me your plans, too. Elena gave a quick nod. Noted. Communication will be more open in the future, sir. Don't use military lingo. Elena paused and in barely a whisper said, It helps. Me. There was something in her voice, a slight tremor. She even bit her bottom lip. Everyone had been through so much, and we were all coping in so many different ways. I reached a hand toward her. She dropped the backpack at my feet and took a step back. There's more in the back of my digger, and there's still more on the floors of the core scraper. She pointed at the backpack. This is what I'm capable of. No more practice is needed. We can fight and fight now. Finn, Mandy, Jimmy, and you and me. We are ready. Let's stick to the raiding plan for now, I said. Yes, sir. If you say so, sir. I pulled my hand back. Thank you, I said finally. She turned and began to walk away. When I added, thank you, Elena, she stopped, but didn't look at me. You're welcome, Nichols. Then she turned her head slightly, and I saluted. She smiled briefly, then turned back and walked away. But she had smiled. Maybe there was hope after all.